So one of the particular teachings that we're going to reference is this talk that the Gnostic master Samuel and Bior gave on the intimate self-realization of the being. And another little subtitle he gave it actually was tolerance, interestingly, which is something we've been talking about within another group of this notion of tolerance and what is tolerance and intolerance. And so we would say the purpose of life from a Gnostic perspective is to reunite with that true nature and to reunite with divinity and that divinity that is within us. And this is really the definition of religion, which, as we've said many times, comes from that Latin word religare, lig, to ligament, to reunite, to rejoin. And to rejoin with what? To rejoin with that divinity that is always within, and the divinity that is really within everything. It is the life force, it is the animating force, it is the truth, we could say, within everything that exists. So from a Gnostic perspective, divinity or God is within us and is within each other and is really everywhere. And we understand that more and more as we begin to understand ourselves and all existence in its multidimensional reality. So our aim is to awaken to this divinity within, our true nature, and to let go of our, what we could say is addiction to the false nature, our state of asleepness or numbness. You know, anybody who's grappled with addiction knows that even if it's addiction to sugar, or addiction to junk food or whatever, that when we are kind of absorbed in that substance, again, even if it's just food, we recognize that the addictive attachment, the addictive behavior creates a numbing effect. And that's part of, our addiction, is to numb ourselves from what? From feeling, from seeing, from knowing, from being with reality as it is. Because maybe we haven't really cultivated that capacity. We haven't really learned or practiced how to do that. And so that fundamentally is what we learn in Gnosis, is through practice, through, in a way, exposure therapy to reality. We just learn how to be with ourselves and life and reality as it is, and grow our resilience to be able to be present and to stay present. Because why on earth don't we stay present? Like, how strange. Why do we check out? Why do we zone out? Why do we numb out? What an odd habit. What?
It can't happen in nature. You look at the birds, they can't do that.
Well, they check out, they're dead. In nature, it's like
Exactly.
the stakes are high.
Bird steaks.
Bird steaks.
Sorry, piled high.
We haven't had breakfast. So, yeah, and nature has that favor in a way that the stakes are really high. The stakes were that high for us. If we had to be aware in order to breathe, if we weren't permitted to just breathe unconsciously.
It's one of those mercy, blessing, and curses as a human being, that we have the mercy to not die immediately, that we forget, but at the same time, we can easily get lost in the non-attention.
Right. Yeah, we are permitted. We have the option of living in a checked out way, but not very well for very long. It doesn't really pan out that well. And that is ultimately what destroys this brilliantly designed human organism that was really, really designed to live for hundreds of years. Your body and your nervous system, your brain and everything, as it was born into this life, was designed to live for hundreds of years. And why we don't is because we disrupt and distort this brilliantly designed human organism with confusion of those contradictions, of the numbing out and all of that. So that ultimately is what does destroy us. So yeah, we can get away with it, but we sure limit ourselves. And this Gnostic school it is a school. And we do have those, multiple levels of study and practice, like any school has. Yes, Jeffrey's taking notes. This school exists, and like all Gnostic schools and centers like it, to help us to awaken to this fundamental purpose of religare, or reuniting with that divine intelligence within us, so that we live truly intelligently, which is not to be led by the intellect, as most people in common current Western society believe. That to be intelligent is to be intellectual, and that's not true. It's a great confusion of our time. So from this talk that the Gnostic masters Samael and Vior gave, Intimate Self-Realization of the Being, he says that unquestionably the intimate self-realization of the being, or the spirit, or one's true self, is most important. If there's anything that should truly interest us, it is our own being. Meanwhile, we're kind of interested in a lot of other things, and that's what we want to look at. And that's why death in motion, as Stewart described, like that consistency, that constancy really of awareness, and dying to the false self, dying to those distractions, dying to our many, many, many addictions, and numbing out, needs to be continuous. We're going to talk about some foundations of self-realization. And we say self in this way, self-realization, we mean the being, we mean the spirit, the true authentic self. So realization, like recognition and realization, and intimate connection with the true self.
I was going to say the big S self.
The big S self, yeah.
Earlier you talked about the I's, the little S self.
Yeah, that's right. And so the first step is to recognize, and recognize in a feeling way. That's really important, that we recognize in a way that we feel, that kind of shocks us. Recognize our own asleepness, recognize what we've been talking about, this asleepness or numbness or disconnection from, distraction away from, this psychological asleepness that we have, the asleepness to the true self, the asleepness to what it is to be awake. Just because I open my eyes in the morning does not mean that I'm psychologically awake and connected to my true self. Let's pay attention to how we wake up in the morning, and what am I connected to right off the bat? What do I start thinking about? What are my priorities right away? And it's very, very valuable, very important, we would say necessary, to ensure that we have a practice, a moment, a way of thinking, a way of feeling and being, and a practice that cultivates awakeness to our true nature every single morning. Because otherwise, inevitably, we're off on the off foot, if we agree that our purpose is religare, to reunite with our true self, and that our daily life is our opportunity to do that. Or is our opportunity to have free will to not do that. But every day is, like Sasha said, a process. So first foundation is to feel our asleepness, to recognize it, to feel our need to awaken. We're in what is referred to in religious terms these days as a great apostasy, which means the rejection of all that reminds of divinity. And this is a sign of a world and humanity, a society that is in a grave state of degeneration, is to be in a state of this apostasy. This is what the book of Revelation warns about, and other teachings as well. Like when a society and its institutions and its culture and its way of teaching, its scholastic institutions, its scientific and medical institutions, and all of its institutions, its universities and grade schools, when there is an apostasy, a rejection, a turning away from all that reminds of divinity, and a lack of practice and focus and way of thinking and teaching and practicing medicine, for instance, that incorporates divinity, then that humanity, that society, that culture is in a grave state of degeneration, of psychological, psyche means soul, psychological degeneration. And that is the state that we find ourselves in worldwide. And that has led us to a tremendous state of inner poverty or insecurity that I spoke about earlier. And in that insecurity, we are grasping from the outside in instead of growing from the inside out what is authentic stability, authentic security, authentic, what we'll refer to in a little bit by another teaching by this master Samael Bior as authentic individuality, without getting confused of like the usual Western concept of individuality being prideful self-sufficiency. We mean a different kind of individuality, something that's real, that's lasting, that's true and connected to the truth, which is not really about the individual self. And anyone seeking a spiritual life, again, feels themselves as swimming upstream in this great apostasy, this great rejection and ignoring of that which reminds us of the divine. And while any of us here, if we're here, we might not like sign ourselves up on a list of apostasy. And yet, if we really observe ourselves in our daily life, like when a problem arises, when we feel offended by something that someone did or said, when I have an economic problem, when I have some kind of threat to my identity or sense of security in life, where do I go? To what do I turn? What do I rely in? What do I rest into? What do I consult? Where do I go in those moments?
Where do I seek shelter?
Where do I seek shelter? Mm-hmm. Where do I seek answers or resolutions? So while we might not, officially sign a list of apostasy, I think when we really observe, we find that we all commit that apostasy in our lives. And that's we could say normal, that's common, because we have built up that false persona, that false sense of security for so long that we learned to rely on it. Just like any addiction, we rely on that substance to get through it. I need this to get through. And so we're all in that boat together, working on this and working to feel our own apostasy or turning away from God, turning away from our own heart, the wisdom of intuition that is within our own heart. And that turning away, we never realize as a turning away. It's like, oh, it just didn't occur to me to consult my intuition. I just tried to solve it, like I always do. And that is our own intimate personal apostasy, that we come together in Gnosis all kind of admitting. If we stick around for more than some public talks, it's because we feel inside this is true, and we recognize that we need help, and we need community, and we need teachings, and we need some kind of structure or didactic or progression to help us to move through this. Because we can, I used to drift through bookstores when bookstores really existed and look at a lot of things, and we can kind of pluck around. But if we really want to gain some traction and have this as a way of life and not just a collage of interesting ideas, we really need some type of school. We need a consistency of teaching. We need a didactic to work with, and that's what Gnosis provides us. We also need a lot of nourishment in our life. We need art and music and poetry and readings that really nourish this feeling, this yearning that we have inside, drew us to a class like this, to really want to awaken. We need to nourish a lot. We need to pray, whatever that means for us. That very feeling alone of wanting to awaken is a form of prayer, because as soon as you give it words, you notice you're praying. As soon as you give that feeling any words, you would recognize, oh, that's praying, I'm praying. So with or without the words, that feeling of yearning to awaken, that ache, that discomfort that we feel inside that makes us long for something more, that feeling inside that recognizes, I really need some help with this. Like, my mind is driving me insane and I don't know what to do. I've kind of come to the end of what I know and I need help. That's a prayer. And oftentimes that very feeling is what has somebody happen to run across a notice of a class like this, because that feeling is a telegraph out, and something comes back to us. So the hope is that we answer that call. So recognizing and feeling our asleepness. And then another foundation for self-realization is to then begin what we call a work. And that work really, really begins with self-observation, really noticing ourselves. Because if you haven't dropped off yet, I mean, then probably at least some of what we've talked about is interesting.
You said many classes or many minutes. Can I say something that I was just hit by? It's obvious. It's like what Judith is talking about is sort of depth over quantity in a world of quantity. How rare is it to find depth? Because depth is in the individual, but in anything where depth is used, like they're going to drill deep, they're going to work. No one does it alone. Mm-hmm. It's always got to be done in a group or with at least the buddy system, because it's not just like, oh, I'm going to dive down deep and hope for the best. No, we need support. We need help, and spelunking with the ropes and the different things. First time in a class I used the word spelunking, but so it's recognized in nature. Mm-hmm. Packs, herds, flocks, and I think it's an important point.
Yeah, thank you. And this is why, I mean, throughout nearly 3 years, we've continued to gather via Zoom, and we've continued to offer public opportunities to join, and we've continued to open new first invitation level groups and progress the group. We've continued because we know the need for this, and we all need this support. And I mean, yay for us for all hanging in via Zoom through these times. And it's interesting now that we're beginning to go back to the physical center in Vancouver, that we're not citizens, and so we were south of the border for a long time, and so we've been able to go back recently, which has been just an amazing reuniting and wonderful to be able to do that, gather in person. And so now we're kind of in this mixture of meeting like this via Zoom and then meeting in person, and doing both at the same time from the physical center there. And it's likewise, even in particularly my work life, I've been noticing this over several months as well, that we've all become really accustomed to the online life. Not all of us, actually. Some of you haven't. You're not glued to a computer for a large percentage of your life, which is really great for you. but a lot have become accustomed to the online life, or a more isolated life, we could say, a more tied to home life, and that in itself is neither good nor bad. But we tend to be creatures of habit, and we a custom, and a great human strength is adaptability. But then, just like a chiropractor lets you know when you show up, it's like, hey, you've kind of over adapted in some ways, and that's going to hurt you over time. And so I'm just noticing that in myself, and I'm noticing that in others as well, the over adaptation that perhaps we've done towards a homebound life. And it's sort of like, I gotta put on pants, like I gotta like drive more than a mile, I gotta take a bus, and so we're just,
we gotta be in people's space.
Yeah, I gotta be in people's space. And yeah, so it's just an interesting time. And like I said, I notice it in myself, I'm noticing it in others, and it's just is part of what's happening right now. We're in a state of encouraging folks to unravel from some of that adaptation and to be together, because humans are nourished by humans. We're social beings inherently, and we need that nourishment and that togetherness together. And so to get together with people working in this way, to look over and there's that other fish swimming upstream right next to you, and you're both doing the work is incredible nourishment. It's part of the strength that we need, among other things. So there's this self-observation, see ourselves as we really are. See ourselves as we really are in daily life, as well as in meditation. And at night too. So we pay attention to our dreams and what can we see of our psyche in that realm of symbols. And we see into our astral dimension, into our mental dimension there, in a way that we're not always able to see in our daily life, that we can see. So we pay attention day and night, in and out of meditation. And there's this great simple mantra we've given many times that the Lord Jesus Christ actually gave to his disciples as well, J-U, or in that language would have been E-A-U, because there's not a J sound in Hebrew, but E-A-U or J-U, that helps to stimulate that very part of our own consciousness that self-observes. There's many aspects or capacities within our consciousness, and one of those capacities or aspects of our consciousness is that capacity of self-observation. It's an atrophied capacity due to lack of use, and so we can help stimulate it, help get that engine going, help oil that capacity with this mantra J-U, this quiet or out loud mantra through the day, J-U, or meditate. If you're close your eyes and you seek to okay, that situation that just happened that's bothering me, what do I turn to? Where do I seek answers or insight? Do I try to poll 20 friends and get their opinions? Or do I take 5 minutes to close my eyes and relax and go inside and consult my heart? And I could say J-U multiple times in silence to try to see myself, to try to observe what is my part in this conflict, for instance. What is my part? Not self-blame and not other blame, but just reality. We need to be dealing with reality in order to wake up to and within reality. So foundations, recognizing and feeling our asleepness. If I don't recognize and care that I am psychologically asleep, I'm just going to remain psychologically asleep. And that is what the majority of 8 billion people want to do. This is not that attractive to a lot of people. It's easier to go downstream. Obviously, it's much easier. Just go with flow, flow downstream. And that's all right, unless it's not all right. And if you're here, it's not completely all right with you. And so then here we are to talk about, okay, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And we would say the first thing you would need to do to begin to awaken is to observe yourself. And now you have this helpful tool, the mantra J-U, to help you to do that. And that is a great example of what Gnostic schools are here to provide, is a didactic and tools to wake up. And then thirdly, balancing the centers. Jeffrey might ask, what are these centers you're talking about? We're going to talk about that more. The fundamental centers of the human, what we call the human machine. And many of you have heard that. So we'll dive into it. But balancing the centers, balancing ourselves internally, is what we could refer to as our cosmic duty. This is what Master Samael refers to as our cosmic duty, through which life unfolds more harmoniously for us. Because when we're not balanced inside, life cannot flow harmoniously through us. Again, we're beautifully designed for the consciousness to flow through us. No creature is designed for the ego to function within it. Nothing is well designed for that. It's the demise of anything living, ultimately, the confusion of anything living or organic. So we'll get to the balancing of the centers. And then the fourth foundation we're going to talk about is death and motion, that we started talking about, and becoming alive through what we could call dying, like we've talked about, dying to the false self. So the centers of the human, we talk about there being 7 fundamental centers that you're seeing depicted here, beginning at the base of the instinctive center. And then in the region, centered, we could say all of these centers, of course, comprise all of what we are, and they flow throughout us all the time. Instincts flow through our mind and our way of thinking, flow through our emotions, impact our emotions, and flow through every cell of our body, for sure. But the core, or the center of that center, is at the base of the spine. And then the center of the sexual center of the human is, of course, in the region of the main sexual organs, of the prostate and the uterus and the ovaries, this region below the navel. And then the emotional center, or what we refer to as the lower emotional center, is here in the region of the solar plexus. All right, so just above the navel. And then we have what is the higher emotional center, and that's the region of the heart and the Anahata chakra. Interestingly, the core of the motor center is at the base of the skull, the upper part of the spine. That is the real core of the center of movement, which interestingly is also related to the Vishuddha chakra and our capacity to listen and speak, either with truth or untruth. So the movement and speaking relate very directly, and that's very obvious in someone like me who really likes to talk with her hands. That movement and speech tend to go hand in hand.
Better your hands than somebody else's.
That's right. So I know, cold.
Chilly.
And then of course there's the intellectual center, and not all creatures have that, but humans do, the intellectual center. And of course, the center of that is going to be in the brain. And the superior intellectual center, guess what, is outside of the brain. The higher mind isn't in the brain. It isn't the brain. It's not thinking. So it's that mind that's able to just intuit and know, and doesn't think and think and think about and around things. That lower mind, we could say, has its place, but not at the top. Mm-hmm. So these are the centers. And we need to create balance within and among these centers in order to be a balanced human being, in order to function properly and consciously. And we bring these centers into what we call 3 brains. There's, of course, the intellectual brain that we mostly think of as a brain, and then there's the emotional brain or emotional center. And then the other 3 of motor, instinctive, sexual are so closely related that we combine them into one brain of action. And often this is talked about as, the intellect, the emotion, and the body, or that brain of action. So really we can just think of balancing these 3. We can think mostly of balancing these 3. And in the new invitation level group that we've just formed, we're starting off talking quite a bit about noticing, observing that we have these 3 brains. Because if we don't notice it, we don't observe it, how are we going to balance something we're not aware of? And so that we have an intellect and its function of thinking and analyzing and judging and comparing, which all has its place. And then we have, of course, the emotional brain with its ability to feel into things and receive an impact emotionally. And that's important information too. And then we have the motor, instinctive, sexual, all very intelligent. The instincts are considered the most intelligent center because of how much the instinctive center is managing. And then there's, the body and the intelligence of the body that we don't need to. In fact, you don't want to interrupt the intelligent movement of the body in sports and dancing with the thinking mind. Or you're a terrible sports person, you're a terrible dancer if you're trying to think through it all the time. The body has its own intelligence and ability. And we want to bring balance to these centers. This is very fundamental to being able to be awake. And it's a matter of psychology, and it's a matter of energy. We cannot really learn and work on and talk about psychology without talking about energy, nor can we, or really should we, talk about energy without talking about psychology. What do I mean by this? So psychologically speaking, take this as a hypothesis. It's part of the Gnostic teaching, but take it as a hypothesis until you go observe it for yourself, that each of us predominates or prefers, has a preference for one of these three brains. Each of us is primarily intellectual in our nature, in our way of immediately perceiving. When we walk into a room, we're looking for, what can I think about and how do I connect with this environment and others in an intellectual way? And tend to get kind of bored or disinterested if we're not getting that kind of connection. Likewise, the emotionally biased person. What can I feel? What kind of mood am I bringing? Do I want to extract from here? How can I connect with people emotionally? And if I'm not getting that, I'm not very interested in being here or interested in these people. And likewise, the more instinctive or body-based type of person would tend to enter a room and want to kind of rearrange things a little bit. Is the temperature okay? And are there enough cups? And, is this a good plan? Can I feel comfortable here? And so there's these three fundamentally quite different ways of being, which is why we get into clashes a lot and wonder, how on earth is that person that way? Well, probably a big part of the answer is what brain they tend to operate from versus what brain you tend to operate from. So that's psychological. But in terms of the energetic component, what happens is that if I am an instinctively based person, which I am, and I'm really unaware of that, I'm going to live a life of constant overdoing. And I'm going to spend the daily reserve of instinctive, motor, and sexual energy that I have. And every night of rest is an opportunity to recuperate or recharge through the chakras that are open and available when we're sleeping, when we're resting, to recharge the energy of the centers. The chakras are completely related to the centers, as those who've studied the chakras already know. And so we recharge those centers with energy every night. Now there's also like a recharge, the beginning of a life, we kind of come in with a certain life battery, but we're rechargeable batteries in the sense that you plug it in every night and it recharges. But eventually the whole rechargeable battery dies, as we found out when we unearthed some really old rechargeable batteries. It doesn't work anymore. So eventually the whole person just dies, the whole battery. But meanwhile, every night we replug it in and it charges back, and so every morning, hopefully we're well rested enough where we come in and we have a certain degree of intellectual, emotional, instinctive, sexual, and motor energy. But if I, as an instinctively based person, spend 90% of my day instinctively in movement and trying to plan and arrange and fix and all of that, I will drain that daily amount of energy that I have in that center. And then those centers will have to start stealing from the reserves that belong to other centers. And I will have to start stealing intellectual and emotional energy. But it's like putting, if you ever have an engine that you're supposed to put oil here and gas there, and if you've ever done the opposite, or if you've ever put regular gas in a diesel engine, womp womp, which we did once, it doesn't work. You break the machine.
It did for a few moments.
It did get halfway, yeah. It went about maybe an eighth of a mile.
Well, but the interesting thing is the analogy of a computer, or even use the computer. Sometimes the computer just doesn't turn on, but sometimes certain elements just don't work because elements inside that computer malfunction. You need the hard drive to change. You need this to change. So within the total of what it is, it's still consuming different elements and different things. And if you're over processing in certain ways, that's what's going to break down. If it's overheating it's wonderful analogies in the world around us.
And so we'll start utilizing improper fuel in the center that we've depleted. And that creates problems. It creates psychological problems for ourselves. It is because we're putting the incorrect fuel into a particular tank, and it causes illness. It causes mental and emotional illness and physical and energetic illness. And it causes problems. And we find ourselves like when you've ever found yourself just obsessing on a problem and you won't let it go because you can't figure it out, and you're just like, and you give yourself a headache or something like that, or over emoting, and like to where you realize like, okay, this is the 10th conversation I've had about this same problem in one day. I think I'm going a little too far, and we notice that about ourselves, and we exhaust ourselves, and we feel that exhaustion. We feel that headache. We feel that pointlessness to having an 11th conversation about the same problem. We feel that physical exhaustion. We feel that doldrum, when the sexual, motor, and instinctive energy is drained, you just feel like a robot at the end, and you're just like, one more chore, and so this is not a good way to live. This is not an intelligent way to live, and we're not flowing harmoniously. So we need to catch ourselves and recognize our imbalance, our unbalanced preference in any area or way of approaching something, and change centers, apply some temperance, limit ourselves, recognize I am overdoing this. And when we understand it energetically and esoterically, we realize, whoa, if I could only have like a meter attached to myself that would show me what's really happening, I would be alarmed and stop behaving that way. If I really saw like the psychic damage I'm creating to myself. So balancing the centers is fundamental, because when we're unbalanced in that way and we're constantly stealing the wrong fuel to make up for our imbalance energetically and psychologically, we don't have the energy for the consciousness to be awake. We lack the energy it takes to swim upstream. The poor little salmon just doesn't have the energy to keep going. And we're in a state of confusion and kind of a certain kind of melee or internal exhaustion. And this is how we're very vulnerable to apostasy then. We're like, I just don't have the energy. And so we don't want to lead ourselves or leave ourselves in that state, because that's a state of non-working where we feel this, I want to awaken, and somehow I can't, or I'm not, or I'm always too tired, or I don't seem to sort it out. I forget, and so we need the energy, we need the potency of energy. And ultimately, the main energy that gets drained and stolen from is potency itself, is the sexual energy, that core of life force within us. So part of what we need to learn to do is to transmute, is to enliven, enrich, and transmute that energy. We're going to do that as part of the practice. John, would you be willing to read? You're a wonderful reader, John. If you would be willing to read this first one, and then I'll look for another volunteer for the next lines.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
What is the cosmic duty or the Parlock duty of the being? First, to not allow intellectual concepts to pass through our mind in a mechanical manner, to become conscious of all the intellectual data that come to mind. How do we become conscious of that data? By means of meditation. If we read a book, we should meditate on it. Try to comprehend it. Samael on the erroneous functioning of the five centers.
Thank you. So we call this a cosmic duty, fulfilling that, what we said from a Gnostic perspective is the purpose of being here as humans, is to fulfill this cosmic duty of the being, to reconnect with the being. And firstly, we must not allow intellectual concepts to pass through the mind in a mechanical way, always just thinking and thinking and thinking. So to observe our mind, self-observe the function of our mind, of our intellect. Who's willing to read the next? Come off mute. Adina, it'd be great to hear your voice.
She gets a big one.
She does get a big one.
I do get a big one. Can you hear me?
We can.
Can. Okay, good. It's a little small because it's on my phone, but anyways. When something is presented to us, when some pure truth comes to meet us on the side of the road, we do not know how to receive it as something new. Rather, we immediately resort to what we have accumulated in the mind with the purpose, of course, of interpreting that which has been presented to us. We are not capable of seeing it as it is in itself. Rather, we interpret it in our own way, in accordance with our own psychological background, in accordance with our prejudices, preconceptions, and conditionings, not capable of opening ourselves up to the new with a pure, integrated, spontaneous mind. We are conditioned. Each of us is blinded, we could say, by some very mistaken type of judgment. And this is from the intimate self-realization of the being.
Thank you. Thank you. So we chose those quotes because we feel that they speak pretty well for themselves. What's important is that we observe this within ourselves. We observe this typical mechanical process, if we will, of the unchecked thinking mind. And we are here to check it with self-observation and make a different choice. Again, that art of temperance that is expressed in the tarot card 14 of the Egyptian tarot that we revere and use in Gnosis. I'm giving you a preview because we're going to look at another tarot card. So thank you for those. I'll go through these briefly. So he continues on in this cosmic duty that second, we should become conscious of all the activities of the emotional center. It is lamentable to see how people move under the impulse of emotions in a completely mechanical manner without any control whatsoever. We should become self-conscious or self-aware of all emotions. Third, the habits and customs of the motor center. Become self-aware of all activities, of all our movements, of all our habits, and not do anything in a mechanical manner. Fourth, we should become lords of our instincts and comprehend them in depth, integrally. And fifth, transmute the sexual energy. As I mentioned, we will practice. In this manner, by fulfilling the cosmic duty, our life will unfold harmoniously. And in harmony with the infinite, we will be able to reach old age full of ecstasy. We will be able to attain mastery. Being mastery of human life, being a master at being a human is really that mastery that we're talking about, mastering that purpose. So now to talk a little bit before we take a very brief break and then end in practice about death in motion that we've begun talking about at the beginning. To become alive through what in this work we call dying to that false nature, dying to that false self that builds on first recognizing I'm not entirely alive as a consciousness, that I am asleep, and feeling that, and then observing how so, when, under what conditions, in what way, and then working from there, recognizing I'm out of balance, and then applying a work to balance those centers that we talk about didactically through these teachings. We've given that self-observation aid of the mantra Jeyu. We've talked about the centers that we have and offered the hypothesis that we tend towards one of those three brains at the expense of harmony, at the expense of mental, emotional, and physical health. So please observe that. Jeyu your way through the day and observe like how you're out of balance, and begin to apply temperance and balance. If you're never in your emotional center, get there. Find ways to get there with beautiful music and art, and try to connect with people more in that way, and in whatever ways you need to provide balance. Let's go for one more reader of this last part. Who's willing to read? Zoo, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. The more the ego disintegrates, the stronger the consciousness will become. And in the end, a permanent center of gravity will be enthroned, we could say, within us, a center of authentic individuality that will completely free us from the actions and reactions of the exterior world. But we need to create that permanent center of gravity in ourselves. And that is only possible by dissolving the ego. Once that center of gravity is created, we will have individuality. But in this day and age, we are not individual people. We are machines controlled by others. Everyone plays with us. We do not have authentic individuality. Somehow, intimate self-realization of being. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So I already mentioned this earlier, like what is authentic individuality is not to be a mechanical, habituated, reactionary machine through the reactions of these centers, but to be awake and conscious, in other words, alive as a consciousness, but only through dying to these false ways of being, false sentiments, false ways of thinking, false habits of the body. Only by, we could say, dying to those do we become alive, conscious, awake, as we were designed to be. And symbolically, in the language of the consciousness, this is conveyed by the tarot card 13 of the Egyptian tarot. Again, we utilize as tools to convey to the consciousness the work to be done. And this card expresses this cosmic duty that we have. If there's anything you want to add about this card right now?
Well, looking at tarot cards, we have to understand there's three levels to them. There's the spiritual on the very top and what's going on there. There's the midpoint, which is the action point or the causal world, but it relates to the physical, what we see, the visible. And then there's the waters, as we say, which relates to energy and or psychology, subconsciousness as well. And so it's interesting, the card generally referred to as death in some ways, but the subtitle is immortality. So it really conveys what Judith was talking about, that life through death, eternal life through death, and what is immortal. And you see from the waters, from the lower realms, these little, I believe in this, the papyrus flowers in Egypt, they're not lotuses, they're papyrus flowers, which is very important for the Egyptians because that's where they would get their paper that they would write everything on. So it's a very important flower, dead and dying, that need to be removed. And notice that in the card, the individual is reaching down with the scythe way down to extract it from the root. But something this is a recent comprehension that I noticed in relation to this. in order to perceive and know where the root is, which is below my visual ability, you have to focus on the stalk or the thing that's here so that you are able to trace it down and reach down into the abyss and cut it. Otherwise, you're just flailing around and you're just throwing up more shade, as the kids say, than light. I think that's what the kids say. I don't know. My hearing aid's a little.
One thing the kids never say is that's what the kids say.
Touche.
But that's, and going into the roots and having just as a pervasive, consistent daily work. Because again, like the stream of apostasy, and we've talked about what that means on a more psychological, intimate way, the stream of apostasy is going backwards. And we're wanting to go upstream or towards the spirit, towards the being, into consciousness. And so there's a constancy to that. If you've ever been in a strong, stream, or if you've ever tried to go upstream or swim upstream, it's a constant effort or you're being carried away. And so we don't just wait for the big moments. We don't just wait for the obvious, because it's all those, when you really look or imagine a root system, and there's like, okay, so there's a main chunky root going down, but it's all those tiny tendrils of roots that are reaching out and finding the water and the nutrients, and they are feeding that big chunky root. And those are constant, and they are many, many, many. So we don't just go in like, I'm gonna abolish pride. It's like, okay, that is a wonderful goal and a necessary one, but it's like, okay, I'm gonna really observe a main nourishment for my pride, which is impatience and also intolerance, because those are constant. Most of us, at least through the personality, have learned to control ourselves. And so we might not have that big moment of obvious anger very often, but the low grade intolerance and judgment and impatience is constant at some level. And so it's that just pervasive sense of self, false sense of self, that we justify, that we normalize, everybody's doing it, that it's the water we swim in, so we don't really notice it. We need to notice it. That is how to die. And when we are not doing that, we are definitely not dying. And we're just kind of waiting for the big kahuna moment, like that big meditation or that retreat, or, when I get to class on this day. But it's the pervasive, for instance, impatience, little judgments that we justify. That's what's feeding the whole ego of pride. So death in motion is to constantly be observing and relaxing and observing ourselves, seeing that is what is happening, being very sincere and doing some transmutation in the moment, and praying, please, don't let me fall into temptation of continuing to think this way, or give words to that judgment, or justify, that way of thinking. Dying in motion. That's how you overcome pride. It's not some one big shot. Any Olympic athlete would tell you, if you happen to know one, that 99.9% of the time is just the routine on the mat. The star moments, the medals being, put around a neck, that's 0.1% of that master of a craft, of the mastery. Most of it is just the work on the mat. And so that's any path to mastery, is 99.9%. It's the daily work on the mat. And that's why we have to love it. We have to love the work and feel our need for it constantly. Okay, so let's take 3 minutes so that we have a final 15 minutes for practice. Take a 3-minute break, and we'll see you in 3. Okay, welcome back. So find a comfortable posture, comfortable position to sit for a little while. Or you could, but a way to be alert and present. And we've got a short time for practice, which means we can really short amount of time. And if you're comfortable with the eyes closed, then you can close your eyes, or you might prefer to have them very barely open and gazing down at a non-distracting spot or focal point. And let yourself relax. Firstly, let yourself relax in the face, relax your shoulders, let go of any immediate tension that you notice, and connect with your breathing. And let yourself become more present, more in the moment, because your breath is very present and in the moment. Noticing the sensations of breathing. Letting your lungs expand as you inhale. And with your inhales, reaching down towards your belly, so you're getting more prana, more life down into your lungs. And for the balancing of the centers and the energizing of the consciousness, the transmutation of the sexual energy is so important. In Gnosis, we recommend to transmute this energy every day, except for when the woman is on her lunar cycle, and transmuting can disrupt that natural process. So we take a pause from transmutation at that time of the month and rather focus more wholeheartedly on the heart and simply breathing in a rhythmic way directly as if into the heart and out from the heart. Because ultimately this is where the trans or the transference, transmutation, the transference and change of the sexual energy lands is in the heart. So imagine a pathway from the very bottom of your spine, related with both the instincts and the sexuality. From the bottom of the spine, imagine a path going all the way up the spine and into the brain, and particularly through the parts of the brain related with the pineal gland and the pituitary glands that are related with the crown chakra and the ajna chakra between the eyebrows, related to that superior mind and that common mind. And then that pathway continues from there, from between the eyebrows, directly into the heart. So just imagine, try to see or feel or sense this pathway from the bottom of the spine, up the spine, through the brain and into the heart. And as you imagine this path, let the rise up the spine combine with your inhale, and let the descent into your heart combine with your exhale. Inhaling up the spine, exhaling into the heart. And in the natural pause or silence after the exhale and before the next inhale, you begin again, you return again to the bottom of the spine. So breathe in this way, inhaling up the spine, exhaling into the heart. You can imagine your breath as a wave, an ocean wave, rising up the spine and curling in the head, and then crashing with all of its beauty and its life into the heart. And if you're breathing through your nose, which is ideal, as you exhale, you can exhale slowly and hear the sound of that wave, that wind, as you exhale into the heart. With each breath, you're moving through the area of all of the centers that we discussed. Moving through them with life force, with prana, with energy. Seeking to purify yourself. Seeking to purify and cleanse all of these centers. And ultimately to land and be and dwell in your heart. You can observe your body, your emotions or mood, and your thoughts without going away with them, without believing in them too much, without being distracted by them. They are part of your experience that your consciousness is witnessing. And you stay with this path of breathing, washing through your centers with prana and life force, creating more harmony, alignment, and peace in this moment, ultimately dwelling in your heart. And with this practice of transmutative breathing and being, let us make a private, intimate commitment, each to ourselves, each to our own essence, to carry this teaching, this motivation, this inspiration forward into the rest of the day. Feeling our longing to be awake, observing the ways that we sleep, and balancing our centers. Remember the mantra Jayu to help you to see yourself, this transmutation to help to balance yourself energetically and psychologically. And remember to see with sincerity those many little ways you nourish the false self, and continue to pray and transmute and feel moved in your heart to let go of that way of thinking, feeling, and being.